Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordian Glory video, and today guys I am super excited to be talking to you because I've got a brilliant video for your viewing pleasure. I'm going to be doing another tournament after action report, and I took another crazy list into the fires of hell guys, and it actually went surprisingly okay. So for those of you that watched my last tournament after action report, I took 365 conscripts to a tournament and did alright. I won half my games, took on some pretty meta armies, didn't lose any of my games spectacularly badly, and it was really cool, and it was just fun to see conscripts melting things with lasguns. This time I went in totally the opposite direction. This time I went for as many tanks as possible, and I actually, for the first time in a very long time, was outnumbered in every single game I played. Even when I faced knights, I was outnumbered, which just goes to show how sort of crazy meme-tastic this list was. So what we're going to do guys is we're going to, as normal, we're going to go through, we're going to say thank yous, list overviews, lay of the land, we'll have an overview of each game, and then we'll get into the lessons learned and final thoughts. So without further ado, let's crack on with today's video. So I just want to say a massive thank you to Just Play Games for hosting the tournament. It was a really, really well run event, and to be honest, I've been to a few Just Play tournaments now, and all of them have been really well organised. The terrain is always on point, fully painted and diverse. One of the best things about the terrain is they have little labels on every single terrain piece that tells you exactly what its characteristics are. So there's no arguments, you don't even need to agree with your opponent before the game. You know exactly what each terrain piece does, which is really, really cool. They've got food, they've got drinks, they've got plenty of models, multiple game systems, and they've got a hobbying painting section that gives any serious hobbyist a uncomfortable feeling in their trousers, to be honest. It's really, really good. So seriously, check them out. Highly recommend them. They actually run regular Warhammer 40k tournaments. They call them Naughty K, and they're always really high quality, high standard of play, and a little bit of a Shark Tank, to be honest. So if you're wanting to push your competitive edge, I highly recommend you check out the regular Just Play Naughty K tournaments. They're really, really good. Massive thank you to Just Play for hosting the event, and for overall it was just a really, really good experience. A fantastic one-day tournament. So thank you Just Play, but now let's crack on with the list overview. Now as you can see from the picture on screen guys, I ran a lot of tanks in my list for this tournament, and there's a kind of funny story behind it. I originally put the channel members to a poll and said, what kind of list do you want me to run? And this is what they came up with. But this was before we'd seen the balanced data slate, or the new points, or Nephilim, or anything, or CP changes. I just went, what do you want me to run now? I ran pure infantry last time, do you want me to run pure tanks, pure science, what do you want me to run? And overwhelmingly they said take the tanks. Then when the data slate came out, I did a follow-up poll. I was like, look, do you really want me to run this, or do you want me to run something maybe a bit more competitive, really push the guard? And again, really strongly, everyone was like, no, meme for the meme gods, you've got to run the pure tank army. So that's why I ran this list, and actually it was really, really fun. Now I'm going to say straight off the bat guys, this is a strong way of running guard, but my list is certainly not optimal. I'm just pulling out every single Russ that I've got. Many of the Russes that I own are actually the old style, where you can't swap the weapons out or the turret options out. So it means I'm actually kind of limited. Now, at the end of this video, when I go through the lessons learned, I'm going to discuss how I would take this kind of list in the most optimum way, and I've got two kind of ways of running it. So that's just something that if you want to stick around to the end of the video or skip ahead to that, feel free to do so. I'll have timestamps down below at the bottom. Now, the list is actually brutally simple, guys. It is a single Spearhead. There are 2 tank commanders, and there are 3 squadrons of Russes and a single tech priest Enginseer. The tank commanders, the first one is the green one with the flag sticking out of the top. That's sort of on the middle of this picture. And he's got a battle cannon, a Lascannon, a storm bolter, and 2 heavy bolters. He is an El Clasico Russ. This Russ has been serving in my army for probably over 10 years. In fact, the oldest Russ in this army has been serving with me for 20 years. And overall, those 4 green Russes at the front, the El Clasico ones, they've got a combined service history of about 80 years. So that just gives you 70, 80 years. So that gives you an idea of how long I've had some of these models, right? So it just felt wrong to like cut them up and put the more optimal weapons on. These guys have been using what they've been using. They're the El Clasicos. So I've got a tank commander with that loadout, and then I've got another tank commander at the back, on the back left, with the red beret poking out the top. He's got a battle cannon, a las cannon, 2 plasma cannons, and he's got a storm bolter as well. Then I've got 3 squadrons of Russes. The first squadron of Russes is at the front, it's the green ones, and I've got 2 with battle cannon, Lascannon, heavy bolters and storm bolters, and 1 with demarcher cannon, plasma cannon, Lascannons. Now the Russes at the back in the tan configuration are the newer style ones, so I had a bit more flexibility over what kind of weapon choice, especially sponsons, I wanted to take with these ones. Now I've got another 2 squadrons of Russes. The first squadron had a battle cannon, a heavy stubber and triple heavy bolter, and the other 2 had plasma cannons on the top, plasma cannons on the side and heavy bolters in the front. The last squadron of Russes wasn't a full 3 tank squadron, it was just 2 tanks, and it was 2 demarcher cannons with triple heavy flamers. And so that was the list overall. Now I had no idea what I was going to do with this list. There's no master plan or anything. I don't know what secondaries I was going to pick, because when it was already locked in, then all the secondaries changed with Nephilim. I didn't really have time to properly consider what the new ones I would take would even be. So there was no game plan with this list. In terms of deployment, the vague plan was put the triple flame and demarchers up front, and maybe the green battle cannon ones up front, because they don't care about getting tied up in combat, and because they've got at least some way of shooting the ways out, and the rest of them kind of just hope and pray you don't get tied up and just blast the enemy to pieces. The general aim was, I'm going to try and kill people, and if I can use my Leman Russ obsec, because Leman Russ and Spearhead do get obsec, try and catch a couple of people out, that would be great. But that was really it. So normally I'd tell you what secondaries I've got and how I deploy it and all that kind of stuff. Honestly guys, I wasn't expecting much out of this list. I expected to go 0-3, I expected to turn up, have a bit of fun, meme for the meme gods, and that was basically it. So a lot of stuff you might see when I do the rest of the games, I had to really learn on the fly, when this list did way better than I expected it to. So just to keep that in mind when I'm telling you like what secondaries and stuff I picked for the missions. I literally had no practice with this list, and so I was literally adapting on the fly. But enough foreshadowing, let's get into the lay of the land. So in this part of the video, I like to talk about the lay of the land, and I cover what was the standard of play, what was the terrain like, and what was the format of the tournament. So I've mentioned this before, but the Just Play tournaments are always a bit of a shark tank. They're always attended by really, really good players. So for example, 2 of the best players that I know were at the event, Matt Robertson and Mike Porter, both absolutely fantastic players, and they were smashing it with their lists. In fact, Matt Robertson won the event. He's won loads and loads of lists. If you've been following my channel for any amount of time, you know I've got a bit of a fan crush on Matt Robbo, because he is the best Sister Battle player that I know, and he's actually one of the best players in the world as far as I'm concerned. Recently joined the Art of War team, so that gives you an idea of how good he is, and I'm very fortunate that he's actually runs my local club, so he gets to kick my ass and I get to learn lots of new stuff. So he was there, Mike Port was there, there was loads of really, really strong players. So high level of play, bit of a shark tank guys, not gonna lie. In terms of the terrain, it was pretty good. Now it wasn't the heaviest terrain that I've ever seen, and you guys, when I get to the pictures of the games, don't worry, it's not just going to be this one picture the whole time. There will be pictures of the game every single game. But like I said, the terrain wasn't the heaviest, but it certainly wasn't the lightest. I would call it a medium density terrain board. Now that did mean that there was some advantage to shooting armies, but in a funny sort of way, and obviously my army is a shooting army, but in a funny sort of way guys, I kind of liked it. And I'm not just saying that because obviously it was advantageous to my army, but I do feel that sometimes the terrain can be a little too heavy in 9th edition, and whilst it's very, very important, the problem with having terrain that's too heavy is it almost over goes the other way, and assault armies get really, really powerful and shooting armies aren't powerful enough. I would say that the terrain at Just Play was actually quite nice. Each player had enough ruins to be able to hide their whole army turn 1, so they couldn't get turn 1 alpha strikes if they didn't want to, and they had a bit of dense going across the middle, and then a bit of LOS blocking. There could have been maybe a bit more LOS blocking, but like I said, it was nice to play on a table where I could actually get shooting angles. I still had to move, I still had to think, I couldn't sit there and gun line, but I didn't feel like I was totally new to playing a shooting army, so I liked the terrain, if I'm going to be honest. Now the format of the tournament was actually pretty standard. It was a one-day event, there were 3 games, there was no points differential or WTC or anything like that. If you won your game, you won your game. So for example, if you won your game by 1 point, you won your game. There was none of this you had to win by 5 points or more or anything like that. I would also say that the missions, every single one of them was, the deployment was table quarter to table quarter. So there was no standard like Dawn of War style or Hammer of Anvil style deployment. You were always going from one corner of the board to the other corner of the board, which actually was quite interesting. And I liked that they did that because it meant that, again, you could deploy on the line or you could deploy a bit further back, rather than what I found with some Dawn of War style deployments where you're guaranteed to get turn one charge and there's almost nothing you can do about it. It really lends itself to assault armies. In terms of the pairings that were done, winners played winners until it got to, I believe, the final round, and then it was based on points. So, for example, round 1, it was totally random. Round 2, winners played winners, but it was randomized. So, you might have someone who won their game with by 60 points and someone who won their game by 90 points. They might randomly end up getting paired up against each other. And then round 3 was, top dogs versus top dogs, just to make it fair. So I really liked that. It was a good mixture of being able to have the right people playing each other, but also making sure that people couldn't submarine or anything like that. Although that is a little bit more difficult to do in a one-day event, it's still nice they took it into account. So 2 thumbs up to Just Play for some pretty solid pairing work there. Now, that's everything in terms of introductions, lay of the land, list overviews, all that kind of good stuff. Now, I know what you guys are excited for. Let's get into the game overviews. But first, ad time. This is you, an Imperial Guardsman, a member of the finest fighting force the galaxy has ever seen. When you're not fighting Xenos, you're defending the Emperor against all manner of heretics and chaos scum. But, like any seasoned Guardsman, you know that real soldiering is 10% fighting and 90% boredom. And who would have thought that other 90% was truly the most dangerous time of your career? We've all been there, stuck on some backwater agri-world on garrison duty with no entertainment and nothing to do and no member of the opposite gender within 100 miles to at least try and fool around with and break up the monotony of day-to-day guard duty. So naturally, your attention might wander. Your thoughts might begin thinking of other things. Maybe even Slaneshi things, heretical things, and you might just pop on FedNet and just search something that you really shouldn't have. Big titty Eldar girlfriend, single tower women in your area, you know what I'm saying, Guardsman. But before you've even had time to put in your Imperial credit card details, the Commissar's kicked your door in, you've been dragged in front of the local Inquisitor, had your nuts tied up to some electrodes, and you're confessing things you didn't even admit to, and then you've had a bolt pistol put through your mouth and blown your head off. How could you have avoided this situation? Well, you could do it with help from today's sponsor, ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN protects you from hackers who try to steal your private information and stops the Commissar from spying on you and finding out what extracurricular activities you've been up to. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. ExpressVPN gives you unrestricted access to all parts of the internet. Like, do you want to watch Keeping Up with the Primarchs, but it's not available in your part of the galaxy? No worries. ExpressVPN allows you to reroute your connection to a server in a country of your choice, making geo-restrictions a thing of the past. ExpressVPN has the fastest speeds as they only invest in premium servers, making them consistently faster than any other VPN provider. They offer 24/7 customer support. Live chat means your questions will be answered within seconds, not hours. It's easy to use. Fire up the app and connect with just one click on your data slate. Trusted server technology. It's physically impossible for any of ExpressVPN's servers to store logs of any customers. ExpressVPN is the top-rated VPN provider, rated number 1 by CNET, The Verge, Wired, TechRadar, and many more. I've used ExpressVPN as part of my Enginseer occult uprising, and so far the Inquisition hasn't been able to find us. And if you click on the link in the description box or type into your browser expressvpn.com/Mordian Glory, not only will you be able to support the channel, but also my ongoing Enginseer occult insurrection. On top of that, if you use my link, you will get 3 extra months free. Think of all of the female Space Marine pictures you'll be able to search for with that amount of time. So go ahead, check it out. And once again, thank you to ExpressVPN for sponsoring today's video. And now, back to the video. So the first mission was conversion. As you can see, it was a table quarter deployment. There were 5 objectives. It was a hold 1, hold 2, hold more mission. And to get extra bonus victory points, what I call the tertiary objective, you had to hold some in no man's land. Make sure you didn't lose your own. If you were very clever and you managed to get into your opponent's deployment zone, then you got loads and loads of bonus victory points. And there's a special rule, leading from the front, you only get CP if your Warlord is alive. So just keep that in mind. Now, my round 1 opponent was an absolutely lovely chap called Peter, and he had Chaos Knights. Now, when I faced Knights in the past, they've always had lots of big stompy Knights, but actually today Peter was running a lot of War Dogs. In fact, he had 13 War Dogs in his list, and they were a mixture of configurations. So he had 2 with double autocannon, he had 4 or 5 with the chainsaws and the melter guns, and then the remaining ones that he had all had chain guns and melter cannon things as well. So thermal lances, I think they're called, something like that. And it was actually a really interesting list to play against because, again, he outnumbered me. I wasn't expecting that when I saw us up against Knights. He outnumbered me, and he was packing a lot of melter, guys. A lot of melter. I think every single, out of his 13 Knights, 11 of them were packing melter cannon things. So actually really good into my all-tank list. Or you would have thought so, but this game was actually the first game I had when I realised, okay, maybe these new guard buffs are something special, because it was a really, really good fight. When I saw his list and I saw that melter, I thought I'm going to get torn apart within a couple of turns. But that didn't happen at all, boys, as you soon will see. Now, in terms of secondaries that were taken, Peter took Path of Destruction, he took Bring It Down, and he took another Chaos Knight one that I'm not exactly what it did. It was something Ruthless something. I took Bring It Down, Engage, and Grind. Now, I didn't take any of the guard ones, but in hindsight, I definitely should have done because I would have scored more points. I took Engage because I figured I could, shoot a tank off up the side of the board and that would be okay with full throttle. And I took Grind because I figured I've only got 10 years, he's got 13. I should hopefully be able to kill more knights than he can kill tanks. And then, of course, I'll Bring It Down because he's giving up max Bring It Down, and I'm giving up max Bring It Down as well. So it was an interesting sort of bunch of secondaries. With hindsight, I definitely should have taken by Lascannon and Bayonet because he would have been on lots of objectives and I would have been able to shoot him off objectives. And I also would have been better taking Inflexible Command because I learned after this game that Inflexible Command, you get a point for killing a unit if you're under the influence of an order, which is really, really good, which means you can actually score 2 points with it a turn without really trying, which is really, really good, especially for this list. So keep that in mind, and I do pick up some of those objectives in the next game. But just so you know, I didn't know what secondaries to pick for this first game, first time using the list, all that kind of stuff. So we roll off, and I get first turn, which is actually quite nice, and I unload on him, and I actually don't do a huge amount of damage. I actually only kill 2 knights, but what happens is one of his knights explodes, and Peter doesn't roll less than 2 mortal wounds on his knights. In fact, most of the time, he's doing 3 mortal wounds to his knights or 2 mortal wounds to his knights. And I think that one knight explosion, because he was crammed in so much, actually ended up doing something like 15 or 16 mortal wounds to him. So whilst I didn't kill very much, I damaged nearly every single knight, which was very, very significant. Now, his turn 1 comes along, and he moves forward and starts unloading on me. And he actually manages to kill 2 Leman Russes and cripple another one. But he goes all in. And he was like, your shooting wasn't that bad turn 1. You're hitting on force most of the time. I reckon I can get up to you, survive another turn of shooting, and then just tie you up, chop you up, and have a great time. Which, to be fair to him, was a good plan. I had a bit of a fear of those chainsaw knights. I didn't want them... I know his other ones could tie me up, but I didn't want his chainsaw knights coming in and actually killing me. So I was initially targeting his chainsawed ones so that it would come down to less of an incentive for him to get into combat with me. Now, my turn 2 comes along, and like I said, all his knights are basically swarming the middle of the board. And I'm like, okay, it's time to go all in. He's gone all in against me. There's no pussyfooting around. Let's show these chaos scumbags the meaning of firepower. Now, interesting side note here. I may have only lost 2 Leman Russes, but One of those was my tank commander with flag, who happened to be my Warlord and Relic bearer, which meant I got no more CP. Which means even though I was facing Chaos Knights, I didn't get to use Vengeance for Cadia more than twice. I got to use it once in my first turn, and then I gained a CP in my opponent's turn, and then I gained, and then I got to use it once in my turn 2, and that was it. So I actually took this Chaos Knight list on with very little Vengeance for Cadia, which wasn't ideal at all. Now, turn 2 rolls around, and I noticed that several of his knights are quite badly damaged. They've either taken a lot of mortal wounds, he's boosted them forward a little bit and taken some of his own mortal wounds, and some of them had taken some initial damage but not been finished off from my turn 1 volley. So my Red Beret tank commander decides he's going to have the honour of the first shot. And I say, you know what, let's just get out of the way, spend my first CP and last CP of turn 2 on and of the game on the tank commander, Vengeance for Cadia, unload. Now, he gets a good amount of shots from his battle cannon and he fires into a knight that's only got 3 wounds. And he kills it easily and it explodes. And explodes again. My opponent kept rolling 6 for exploding. And it was again bunched up around a load of war dogs. So he kept doing loads of mortal wounds. And again, he kept rolling like 2 mortal wounds on every single knight. This actually ended up killing another one of his knights. So one battle cannon shot got 2 kills. 1 shot, 2 kills. Double kill. And then the plasma cannons and las cannons opened fire on another knight. I fired the las cannon first, got the hit with a 6 for Hammer the Emperor. He failed his invulnerable save, and then I got a 6 on the damage, and it just took out another knight. So I didn't even get to fire the plasma cannons, and a single tank commander took out 3 knights. And that really set the tone for this turn, because then the rest of the boys unloaded, and I picked up 7 knights turn 2, which meant in 2 turns of guard tank shooting, I had killed 9 out of 13 war dogs, but he only had 4 knights left. And really, guys, that kind of sealed it. My opponent was smashing me on points, but he had no way of stopping me now rolling out, rolling up, and smashing into him and just taking him out. So that's basically what happened. He did manage to kill a couple more Leman Russes with some lucky, melter and stuff here and there. But overall, I only lost, I think, 4 Leman Russes this game. And in return, I killed all of my opponent's knights bar 1. Now, my opponent absolutely smashed me on primary, but he struggled on secondaries. And the final score of the game was 63 to my opponent and 64 to the guard. I won by just 1 point, but I still won, and I was really, really happy because I'd expected to go 0 through this list, and I'd actually done really, really well. And let me tell you guys, Armour of Contempt made a huge difference. There were 2 moments in the game when Armour of Contempt saved my ass. The first time we really noticed how powerful it was going to be was when he unloaded with his autocannon knights from across the board. And he got like 6 or 7 wounds on my Leman Russ with them, and then I just passed all the saves. And the funny thing was, I passed basically every single one of those saves on a 3-up. Now, normally I would have failed those because his autocannons are AP2, but thanks to Armour of Contempt and me having a 2+ save now, I passed every single one. And it was like the dice gods were rubbing it in his face, in my opponent's face. And then another time he kept, he kept wounding me with his melters, but I kept rolling like a 5 to pass a save. So it actually meant that I was saving where 4 days ago, before the balanced date slate, I wouldn't have been able to save any of these wounds. So it made a huge difference. First game, I started to feel this Armour of Contempt stuff kicking in, and I really started to feel how durable my list was. Yes, it struggled on secondaries, but it shot the crap out of anyone. Even though I wasn't running tank commanders, my Leman Russes were still doing fantastic amounts of damage. So that was game 1, a win under the belt. Now let's get into game 2. Now, game 2 rolls around and I get the pleasure of facing off against Dylan with his Harlequins. Now, Dylan is a really, really good player, and Harlequins are possibly one of the worst matchups for my army because every single one of his squads is packing Melter again, but more importantly, he's really fast and he can tie me up in combat really, really easily. So and Dylan is, like I said, he's a really good player. He actually was playing in the final to win the tournament, so it gives you an idea of what he was doing. And in his first game, he played against a Night Lords player where I think he'd removed 90% of his enemy's army in turn 1, something insane. Do you know what I mean? So he was a really good player with a really strong list, and it was a perfect counter to my list, or traditionally it would have been. Now, the mission was by Blood and Death and Zeal, I should say, and it's a hold 1, hold 2, hold more. The special rule for the mission is if you've got OBSEC and you hold an objective, you keep holding it until someone takes it off you. And the tertiary is if you control an objective marker that you didn't control at the beginning of the game, beginning of the turn, you get 2 victory points. And if you destroy an enemy unit that was in range of an objective marker, then you get 2 victory points as well, which is really, really good. Now, my secondaries this game, I can't remember what Dylan took for his secondaries, but my secondaries this game, I took by Lasbolt and Bayonet, which meant that every time I killed something in range of objective marker, I got another point. And I also took Inflexible Command because I realised that I could get more points from it than I thought. And I also took Banners. Now, Banners was a bit of a funny one, but the thing is, guys, I went into this game, I looked at my opponent's list and went, he's going to smash me on points here. He's going to absolutely smash me on points. I just need to be able to try and get some points. Could I have chosen a better one? Maybe. Maybe I could have taken Grind, but I'm not sure if that's in the same vein as like Inflexible Command or something like that. I took the objectives I thought would be interesting, and I thought maybe I'll be able to get some points out of them. Now, for deployment, Dylan had deployed everything as far back as he could behind a ruin, so I couldn't see anything and draw any line of sight to him. That was actually kind of good for me because it meant that he couldn't get a turn 1 charge. It meant I could deploy kind of far back, but not totally far back, and I could still have some board control, or hope for some board control. Now, Dylan got turn 1 and he came flying forward, but he couldn't hide everything. And so his initial volleys of shurikens went off and basically did no damage. Any damage he did do, I essentially self-repaired between the Tech Police Enginseer and the Jurry Rigging Repairs custom trait. I basically self-repaired most damage that Dylan was doing to me turn 1. Now, my turn 1, I'm able to move out, and yeah, if I move 10, I don't get to double shoot, but I'd rather move 10 and shoot something than move 5 and shoot nothing. So I'm like, actually this army is kind of maneuverable, and when you've got 10 Leman Russes, it doesn't matter if they're all only firing once or half of them are firing once. It's still the equivalent of getting 5 full Leman Russes with the firepower on the enemy. So I unload on Dylan, and I actually managed to kill 3 of his boats. Now, bear in mind, I'm hitting on 5s with no rerolls because Harlequins. I actually managed to kill 3 of his boats and kill about 10 of his infantry as well, which he was not expecting at all. He actually was like, I can't believe you've killed 3 boats. No one kills 3 boats in a turn. It just doesn't happen. They're just really hard to kill. And I was like, well, I do have Hammer of the Emperor, which means even though I'm only hitting on 5s, half of the hits I do get literally auto wound. And then it just comes down to a 50-50 whether he passes it or not. And once they've got through that invulnerable save, Harlequins are kind of weirdly easy to kill. They're really durable, but it's very, once you can get past some of their crazy bullshit, they're actually relatively fragile. So, for example, I had a Demolisher Cannon that only got like 2 wounds through on one of his boats. He saved 1 and I passed 1, and then for the damage, I just rolled a 6 and just crumpled it, turned it to tinfoil. It's interesting when you've got sort of heavy firepower on every single tank, you are actually able to really just blast away against enemy units, and only a few hits need to connect for you to do quite a lot of damage. Now, turn 2 rolls around and Dylan comes flying in and starts doing what Harlequin was doing in the situation, which is tying me up. And so it was kind of a predictable game. He scored really, really, really well on primary, and he did pretty well on his secondaries. And I struggled to get out of my deployment zone pretty much the whole game, which I knew going into it that was what was going to happen. And I said to Dylan, like, not to like try and influence you or anything, but you know, I know he's a nice guy. I was like, this is kind of your game to lose. And he's a good player, so he didn't lose it essentially. Spoiler alert. But what happened was he was taking so much damage. He was having to throw scraps at me here, there, and everywhere, and he was just taking so much damage. And there was this one instance that made me laugh, and it was really, really good, where he tied up one of my Flamer Demolishers with a boat, thinking, yeah, it's got flamers, but maybe he didn't see all of the flamers, I don't know. And then I was like, right, well, my turn, I'm going to spend 2 CP to use Hail of Fire, which means I get full shots instead of random shots. For those that don't know, Hail of Fire is a stratagem in the Greater Good, which means when you're firing a Leman Russ at another vehicle, rather than rolling the random number of shots, you get to get maximum shots. Now, normally it's reserved for things like your battle cannons, your demarcher cannons, and your plasma cannons, but heavy flamers are a random shot weapon. And so I got 18 flamer hits against his boat, burned the boat, and I did really well on the wounds. I got like 14 wounds, burned the boat to a crisp, turned around, demarcher canned another boat. So it was just so fun. Like, he didn't even tie me up when he tried to tie me up. So I did a huge amount of damage to Dylan over the course of the game. And his return damage was really, really weak because basically his shurikens were just bouncing off. Even if he got like a rending hit, I still had a good chance of saving it. And his fusion pistols, he only has 2 in each squad. And he only hits on 3s. If I pop smoke, he's hitting on 4s. And then he has wounds on 4s. And then Armor of Contempt means I've got a 5-up save. So there was a couple of turns where he was firing off fusion pistols left, right, centre and just not really doing any damage. Now, the end result is that Dylan absolutely smashed it on points, and well played to him. There were a couple of moments when a lesser player certainly would have got flustered and potentially made mistakes and thrown the game, and he didn't. Whilst he was certainly under a lot of pressure from the Leman Russ list, and there was at one point when he went, this game is not going the way I expected to go, he did manage to keep his cool, and he got 90 points on the mission, and I got 60 points. So he absolutely smashed it. But I will take a slight moral victory because I only lost, I think, 4 Leman Russes this game. It wasn't very many at all. And Dylan had 2 models left on the board. I believe they were 2 Harlequins. Now, I'm not talking characters. I'm talking 2 individual Harlequin 1 wound troop models. So I absolutely smashed him on points, but he kept me penned up long enough so that I wasn't able to get many primary points or until the last turn. By that point, it didn't really matter. So it was a really, really fun game. And for me, I actually really enjoyed it. Even though I lost, it was really, really satisfying. And I'll tell you why. Because a month ago, this game would have been just an absolute massacre. The Harlequins would have come flying in. The guard would have done no damage. There would have been more boats. The tanks would have been half as durable. And I probably not only would have lost on points, but could easily have been tabled. Now, I may have lost on points, but I certainly won the battle in terms of, killing things. So I actually really liked it. And yeah, well played, Dylan. I just want to be clear, not taking anything away from his victory. He absolutely smashed it. He played fantastically, controlled his army expertly. But for me, I did get a little more victory that a game that I thought I was absolutely going to get smashed on, wasn't even going to, kill anything. I actually not only killed a lot of stuff, but actually smashed my opponent in terms of kills, which is nice. I'll take that little moral victory. Now, I actually chatted to Dylan afterwards and said, what would you have thought if I just had a single heavy flamer on the front of each tank? And he went, if you swapped out those whole heavy bolters for heavy flamers, it would have been a totally different game. I couldn't have tied you up. You would have absolutely smashed me. It would have just been a massacre the other way. So it just goes to show a little simple tweak could make a big difference. But we'll get into that a little bit more in the full end of sort of tournament summary and thoughts at the end of the video. So game 3 rolls around and it's data, scry, salvage, which is where you have to hold 2, hold 3 or hold 4, and you get some tertiary points by doing an action on your home objective and holding no man's land objectives. Now, I was playing against Simon and his custodians, and Simon was a really nice player. In fact, all of our players were really, really top blokes. I really liked Simon's custodians army. He'd gone for a different colour scheme on it. It was silver rather than gold, and I actually think silver custodians look better than gold custodians. It just looked really unique and interesting. Now, Simon's army was a little bit different to what I've faced in the past. It was 3 regular-sized dreadnoughts. 2 of them had halberds, 1 of them had a sword and shield. He had 2 squads of regular custodian guard with sword and board and a squad of sisters. He had Trajan, he had a bike captain, he had the banner guy who gives you -1 to hit, I think it's a Vexilla, and then he had 2 squads of bikes, 3 or 4 bikes in each one. And so he had manoeuvrability and whatnot, but he was kind of going for durability with those dreadnoughts over being really fast and screwing me up with bikes. Now, whenever I've faced custodians in the past, it's the bikers which have always been the worst thing for me to face. And so when I saw that he didn't have as many of those, I thought there could be a chance here Traditionally, I've always struggled against Custodians. I've either barely beaten them or I've been smashed by them. So it was really interesting for me to see a list that I thought maybe I'd be able to do alright. Those Dreadnoughts do pack some deceptively strong firepower, especially from those like Lances. But I figured he's only got like 2 of them, and I might actually be able to do some decent damage against him. However, every single one of his bikes was packing a salvo launcher, basically a melter missile launcher. So he was still packing a shitload of anti-tank. But will it be enough anti-tank? Well, I guess we'll find out, won't we? Now, in terms of secondaries, my opponent took Bring It Down, and then he took 2 of the Custodes ones. One of them was where if you don't, it's like a mega grind. If you don't lose any units and kill some of your opponents, you get like 4 victory points. But the moment you lose something, you get none. And they took another one, which I can't remember exactly what it is. So it was like Stranglehold, but for Custodes only. I took by Lascannon and Bayonet because it worked really well for me last time, and I figured again we're going to be having lots of objectives, it's going to be holding lots of objectives. If I kill things on objectives, I'm going to be having a good time. I originally thought by Lascannon and Bayonet it was like the worst one for the guard, but actually it worked out really well in pretty much every game that I took it. I took a flexible command because again I figured I'd be killing stuff under the influence of orders and I'll be able to keep in range of my tank commanders fairly easily. And I took banners again because I figured if I kill his bikes, I can probably get more than 1 banner up and get some decent points by the end of the game. Now, again, when it came to deployment, my opponents were really fearful of my firepower. I did explain to Sam what my list could do, but he's not faced guard before. He's played a few games with his Custodes, and he'd won. You know, he's won his first game at the tournament. But I think he was a slightly less experienced player. But he certainly knew what he was doing with his units. He just wasn't overly familiar with what his opponent could do, and so that definitely worked to my advantage because I know what Custodes do. They're tough, they shoot, they chop, they're horrible. But my opponent doesn't really know what guard does, and especially doesn't know what guard tanks do. So it was kind of interesting. So he deployed quite far back with his bikes, which I was really grateful. Yes, he was hiding them out of line of sight, which was good for him in case he, I got turn 1. But it's good for me because it means I'm pretty much guaranteed to get a turn or 2 shooting at them. And there's only 7 of them, so I can pick those bikes up without much difficulty if I get the opportunity to do so. Now, he deployed his bikes behind his ruin in his deployment zone, and he deployed his dreadnoughts out on his right flank with the Vexilla, so they had the -1 to hit. I actually ended up getting turn 1, and it was an interesting turn because I opened fire and I didn't think I did that much damage. I killed one of his Lance Dreadnoughts or Halberd Dreadnoughts and brought the other one down to like 4 wounds, I think it was, which I didn't think was a huge amount of fire damage considering the amount of firepower I've got to bring to bear. But my opponent literally was like, I can't believe how much damage you've done turn 1. And I was like, I've only killed a Dreadnought, bro. It's like, you've killed a Dreadnought and you've degraded another one. Literally, that has never happened in my games with these guys. They're so tough normally that everything just bounces off them, but you just smashed them. Sounds like a bit of an exaggeration, but my opponent was like genuinely like, from as much as one can be when playing a game with Twin Soldiers, like visibly shaken with how much firepower this guard army had put out. Especially considering he's got reduced damage and reduced to hit and all this kind of stuff on those dreadnoughts. Now, he walks forward with his army, brings his bikes forward, and unloads, but I popped smoke preemptively with some of the tanks because I knew that his bikes were going to come out. So they don't do that much damage. And in fact, after the dust settles, he actually hasn't killed a single Russ in his turn 1 shooting. He's degraded 2, 1 down to 6 wounds, 1 down to 2 wounds, but he hasn't killed any. So then my turn 2 comes along and I kill all of his bikers. I've got overlapping fields of fire set up. Not stratagem, just actual overlapping fields of fire. And I just pick up all of his bikers and I finish off his wounded dreadnought as well. And my opponent's like, right, that's it. That's game. Because the thing is, even though he had degraded 2 dreads, I spent 1 CP to make the 4 wounds 1 act on top, 2 wound 1 which healed up to 4 wounds act on top profile. And then the other one just healed itself up anyway and went from 6 wounds to 7 wounds. That's top bracket, guys. So my return fire, he basically hadn't done any damage. And so that's why I did so much damage in return to him. Yeah, he was on -1, but his bikes weren't in range of any -1 to hit. Oh no, one of his squads was. One of his squads was in dense, which meant that I actually still, even with those hitting on -1, managed to just flatten 7 bikes and finish off a dreadnought. His turn 2 comes along, and his remaining bike captain charges into my wounded demolisher, the one that only had 7 wounds left, and kills it. Fair enough. But then that's it. He doesn't even manage to kill the 4 wound Leman Russ, he doesn't actually manage to do any damage to it. He just, what firepower he has just bounces off. So he kills 1 Russ. My turn 3 comes along, I pick up the Bite Captain, I pick up the Final Dreadnought, I pick up Trajan, I pick up the Vexilla, and all he's got left going into his turn 3 is 2 squads of Custodian Guard and 5 Sisters of Silence sat on objectives. That's it. So it was an absolute fucking massacre. I lost 1 Russ, guys. That was it. And so basically, the remaining turns I had, I couldn't actually see that much. It took me a while to get some angles and stuff. But my turn 4, I killed 1 unit of Custodian Guards. My turn 5, I killed the other unit of Custodian Guards. And I just smashed it on terms of like victory points and everything. And when the dust settled, my opponent had got about 50 odd victory points to my 80 odd victory points. So it was a really, really decisive win. I almost tabled the Custodians and only lost 1 Leman Russ. The one that he almost killed, the green one that you can see now, didn't even die. It just ended up repairing itself up to basically full pop by the end of the game. And my tech breach was able to run around putting up plenty of banners. By the end of the game, I even got some more points on that. And it was just overall just a really strong showing for the Guard. Not much to say about it. Ended up being a little bit of a poor matchup for my opponent because, yeah, Custodians are tough, but when you've got to rely upon being able to walk across the field of battle and being durable, but your opponent can literally overwhelm your durability, it doesn't mean much. And the thing is, my opponent's stratagems weren't even that useful because Hammer of the Emperor just meant I was bypassing most of his like transhuman stuff that he could do anyway. So really strong win for the Guard, and we ended the tournament winning 2 games and losing 1 game, which is such a good showing for a list that I thought was going to go 0-3. I went 2-1. So yeah, ended up doing much better. I can't believe I actually ended up winning 2 games. I expected to not win any, so it was just so much fun. But we're going to talk about some final thoughts now and then lessons learned. Now, what I would say is that Armour of Contempt is absolutely fantastic for the Guard. Combined with Hammer of the Emperor, it actually feels like we've got power and durability back into our armies. I fully expect to see Guard win rates starting to climb quite happily. I'm not sure we're tournament winning yet. Well, 2-day tournament winning yet. But I think that Guard now have a solid chance of winning 1-day local tournaments and doing really well at bigger events too. Now, I did mention I would talk about a couple of ways I would improve this list. And there's essentially 2 alternatives, 2 ways I would change the list up. I would essentially, if you keep with the whole I'm going to take maximum Leman Russes route, then what you want to do is you want to take about half of them with Demartian cannons and half of them with longer range firepower. I found the battle cannons to be okay, but you could certainly go with something like Executioner Plasma Cannons instead to have better AP and more reliable damage. But the battle cannons were pretty useful. It was nice being able to outrange everyone consistently. 5 Demolishers would have been more helpful though. I certainly noticed whenever my Demolishers fired, they did way more damage. The problem I found was they'd sort of trundle out, blast something to death and then get killed really easily. Or not killed really easily, then take damage or get killed or whatever. And then my battle cannon Russers would often sit at the back and start just firing rounds down range. So that's kind of the trade-off. But if you've got half and half, I think you do really, really well. Another way that I'd mix up the army is to go for all Demolisher tanks. But what I'd do is I'd take 8 Leman Russes rather than 10. Okay? And I'd give every single Leman Russ a Demolisher cannon and at least 1 heavy flamer. Hell, I'd be tempted to go for Demolisher cannons and triple heavy flamer on every single one. But then I'd take the regiment trait, Gunnery experts and spot details to make those Demolisher cannons with a 30-inch range, and then with your movement, that's a 35-inch threat range. And then your flamers, you don't care about getting tied up. Hell, I slap a Stormbolt on every single one of them as well, just to make sure they do not care about getting tied up at all. What I'd then do instead with my remaining sort of points is I'd take a couple of full payload Basilisks to the squadron and then take a couple of Medusas. Now, what that means is not only do you have indirect fire, which is a really big weakness of this list, also means you're keeping your long range fire support, which is really, really good. If you were not sure about taking 8 Demolisher tanks, then what I'd say is take all the regular Russers as Demolishers and then take your tank commanders as maybe a more long range fire support option. But that's how I would play with it. Final thoughts on taking mass tanks. There's essentially, in my mind, 2 ways you can run the mass tank army most effectively. You can either do what I did and take jury rigged repairs so that they self-repair, which is really, really nice. I have to say, over the course of every game, I probably repaired between 15 and 20 wounds. Russes really get some good use out of that trait now because they actually live, which means they actually get to repair. Every single game, a degraded Russ would repair itself back into top bracket. It was really, really useful. The other way I'd combine that with Gunnery Experts. You've got to take Gunnery Experts. You need to be able to reroll those random shots. If you're not taking droid repairs, then obviously Spotter Details is the other way to go. And that's it for today's video. If you've enjoyed today's video, please consider giving it a like and a subscribe. And if you've really enjoyed today's video, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. It's thanks to the generous support of the channel members and the Patreons that I'm able to go to tournaments, take these wacky lists and bring the feedback back for your viewing pleasure. It's also thanks to these generous support that I'm actually able to do Mordian Glory full time. So massive heartfelt thank you to all of my channel members and Patreon supporters. And I want to do a quick shout out for our latest channel members. So I want to say a huge thank you to Neo Cosmopolisis, Eric McCombs, Dwarf Hammer, Caligula, Ryan Hancock and Silent Warrior. We recently passed 100 channel members, which is absolutely amazing. I originally had set myself a goal of 25 in the first month, and we got over 100, which is just mind-blowing. To be honest, it's kind of humbling. So I can't say enough. Massive thank you to everyone that's signed up the channel membership. You're all fantastic people. But it'd be very remiss of me not to say thank you to my Patreon supporters as well. So I want to say a big thank you to everyone who's recently joined the Patreon. So thank you to Gankistani, Ben Thorne, Alon Halfin, Marcus Roberts, Timothy Jägermeister and Jesse Cashman. Massive thank you to every single one of you. Your support really makes a huge difference. And before we go, I want to say a personal thank you to all of our top tier Patreon supporters. These are the guys that are subscribed at the top level and have gone above and beyond to support the Mordian Glory channel. So I want to say a personal thank you to August Varney, John Stubbs, Nicholas Walsh and Swordfish Trombone for being signed up at the top tier Lord General Patreon. You guys are just... it's amazing, man, and the amount and what you're doing is life-changing. It's thanks to all our Patreon supporters and especially my top tier ones that I've been able to do this gig full time. And I also want to say a special thank you to everyone who signed up at the Commissar level as well. That's Diesel Fox, Shoots McGavin and Tom Sutton. Tom's actually been a long time supporter of the channel and he recently increased his pledge to the Commissar level. So thank you, Tom. Really appreciate it. And all of my commissars, you're all fantastic people and your support makes a huge difference. But that's all for today. I hope you've enjoyed the video and as always, I'll see you guys next time.